This video compiles multiple theories about the Gorosei into a single 1 hour long package. It will go over everything from who is the strongest of the 5 elders to what the secret race of the elders could actually be. If you're already familiar with my content, the final theory in this video is also something I haven't shared in any of my previous videos. The first theory this video is going to cover is why the Gorosei could actually be beings from hell brought by Imu to the normal world. Over 20 years since their introduction, we've finally seen the Gorosei participating in combat on Egghead Island. Their abilities, however, go against many of the established rules of the One Piece world. This opens a whole can of worms on what the Gorosei actually are for them to be so different. As weird as it may sound, if the 5 elders break so many rules of the One Piece world, could it be possible that they're actually not from there? Although it might seem far-fetched, there are genuine hints in the story indicating that the elders may in fact originate from Hell itself. This video will go over the possible existence of Hell in One Piece, how it could be connected to Imu's devil fruit, and how all of this could explain the true nature of the Gorosei. To address the big question right away, yes, Hell is very much a place that can exist in the One Piece story. In fact, Hell as a concept is something that is frequently brought up by the characters. Just to go over a few examples, Usopp brought up Hell when giving his speech to Luffy at the end of Enies lobby. Sanji also said that being in the Kamapaka Kingdom was like being in Hell, and later named his new attack Hell's Memories. Doflamingo said that he experienced Hell as a child when his family was persecuted. Vito also mentioned that even the demons of Hell attend Big Mom's tea parties. The characters here clearly use Hell as a metaphor, not an actual place they think exists. Still, just like Sky Islands or the One Piece treasure itself, many things in the story that are initially thought to be myth or legend later turn out to be actually real. The aforementioned examples are also just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Hell being brought up in the story. In just the Wano arc alone, there's at least half a dozen times when the characters mention Hell. While Hell is a concept consistently present in the story, the fact that characters keep bringing it up actually has more importance than just foreshadowing. The reason for this is that Hell being a place the people of the One Piece world think about inadvertently means that it can exist. This is because during the Egghead arc, the story finally revealed a theory on where devil fruits come from. According to Vegapunk, devil fruits are born out of people's dreams. In other words, this means that anything that people dream of can later become a devil fruit in the actual One Piece world. This explains how all manner of seemingly impossible things like zombies, dragons and rubber humans can exist in the story through devil fruits, as they're all things that can be thought of by people's imagination. This actually goes back to a concept brought up in the early parts of the story, where the Chaya arc is started off with the quote, "Anything man can imagine is a possibility in reality." Because the people living in the One Piece world seem to very much imagine a place like Hell, it opens the door for a Hell fruit actually existing in the One Piece story. If Hell were to be an actual place in the One Piece world, however, what would that actually mean? While places like Kamapaka Kingdom and Impel Town have been referred to as Hell, they're clearly different from the literal Hell characters often talk about. The idea this video is going to go off on is that if Hell is actually real, it could be located in a different dimension of the One Piece universe. While this may sound like a dose of bad fanfiction, it has actually already been confirmed that there are multiple sub-dimensions in the One Piece universe. The dimensions that have so far appeared in the story are the Door Dimension and the Mirror Dimension, both of which are accessed through devil fruit abilities. The Door Dimension is accessed by Blueno using the Doa Doa no Mi. Blueno is essentially able to use his fruit as a teleporter to travel in and out of the Door Dimension. The Door Dimension itself is seemingly a parallel version of the One Piece world. We saw this when Blueno escaped there during his fight with Luffy, where the environment looked very much like the real Enies lobby, only without any of the characters. The Mirror Dimension on the other hand is accessed by Brulee's devil fruit through the use of mirrors in the normal world. Unlike the Door Dimension, the Mirror Dimension is its own unique world made up of an endless array of tiles and mirrors that lead back to the normal world. It is unclear whether these dimensions are the creations of said devil fruits users, or whether the dimensions have always been there and are simply accessed by the users. It could actually very well be the latter, as the Big Mom pirates refer to Brulee as the key to the mirror world. As dimensions are an established concept in the One Piece story, theoretically, a potential Hell fruit could exist and work very much the same way the Door and the Mirror fruits do, where it could give the user access to another world known as Hell. To go a step further with this idea, What if, of all the characters, this was actually Imu's devil fruit? And what if the Gorosei were originally beings who lived in hell, and Imu, with the power of the hell fruit, brought them to the normal world? As brought up at the start, the 5 elders are extremely different from the thousands of other characters seen so far in the manga. The reason why they are so different could all however make sense if the Gorosei are members of a completely different race. And as their abilities don't seem to fit any of the known One Piece races, it could actually make sense that the elders are not only from a different race, but also from a different world. The video will next address why this could actually be true, and why the Gorosei's abilities cannot be explained as simply being related to devil fruits, haki, or other known power systems in the story. While One Piece is an extremely fantastical story, everything supernatural in the manga follows a strict set of rules. In essence, whenever the story introduces a character with apparent supernatural abilities, there are usually a maximum of 5 explanations behind them. The first and by far the most common is devil fruits. Devil fruits in One Piece are an extremely heterogeneous source of power, and, as brought up before, are the reason why things like talking reindeer, flying islands, and living toys can exist. The rules with devil fruits are also very simple, where there can only be one of each fruit in existence at the same time and one person can only ever eat one fruit. The second most common explanation for supernatural phenomena in One Piece is haki, which is an ability that can be accessed by any living being. Haki is far more restricted than devil fruits, but it also offers more universal abilities, such as precognition and invisible armor. This for example explains how someone like Rayleigh is able to kick a man made out of light, or how the likes of Katakuri and Luffy are able to see into the literal future. The third most common source of supernatural abilities are connected to the race of the character. Many of the different races in One Piece for example give their members an innate ability to manipulate different elements. The race of fishmen are able to manipulate water, the race of minks electricity, and the race of Lunarians fire. Other race-based features include things such as superhuman strength, gigantic proportions, and flight. The fourth reason for seemingly otherworldly abilities in One Piece is technology, which can for example be used to artificially recreate many of the previously mentioned abilities. Technology is for example why the Seraphim are able to simultaneously have devil fruit abilities, as well as features of races such as the Giants and the Lunarians. The fifth and most mundane reason is simple raw physical power. One Piece is an innately supernatural world, where, in theory, anyone is able to perform superhuman physical feats, such as walking on air or destroying a fortress with one punch. There are also more bizarre examples, such as Sanji kicking Duval a new face, or Denjiro changing his entire appearance through sheer rage. While I'm aware that there are certain abilities in One Piece that go beyond them, 99% of supernatural phenomena in the series is generally explained by one or more of these 5 categories. A frequent thing that actually happens in One Piece is that the Straw Hats encounter something very supernatural, only for it to be later explained by one or more of these 5 sets of power. Someone like Enel first appeared to be an omnipresent god, able to strike down anyone who spoke ill of him with thunder. In actuality, Enel was simply using his lightning devil fruit in conjunction with very powerful observation haki to listen in on everyone in Skypiea, and striking them down if they spoke against him, creating the illusion that he was a god. This smoke and mirrors concept is present in practically every arc of One Piece. Shanks scaring off the Lord of the Coast through his presence in Chapter 1 is later explained to be because of his Conqueror's haki. Frankie is able to breathe fire without having a devil fruit because he is in fact a cyborg. Kawamatsu is thought to be a demon kappa by the people of Wano, though it's later revealed that he is simply a fishman. Even a wonderland-like country such as Totland, where animals speak, the buildings are made of food, and prisoners are held in giant books, is only revealed to be the product of the Big Mom Pirates' different devil fruit powers. When it comes to the Gorosei, however, they seemingly break all of these rules. So far, the supernatural abilities displayed by the 5 elders include regeneration from all damage, telepathic communication between the elders, mutual teleportation across the world, being able to turn into gigantic beasts, telekinetically restraining and killing people, and seemingly not aging. It is genuinely impossible for all of this to be explained by either devil fruits or haki alone. I will begin by going over how the Gorosei's powers have to be more than simple products of devil fruit abilities. As brought up before, a devil fruit only grants one user one set of abilities. However, the 5 elders seemingly all share many of their abilities, such as regeneration and telepathy. We can also confirm that each of the Gorosei has at maximum eaten one devil fruit. This is because after the Marineford arc, the Gorosei quite literally mentioned that Blackbeard is the only person in history who has eaten more than one devil fruit. It also appears very likely that the Gorosei's respective devil fruits are in fact all Zoan types that are represented by their beast forms. The reason why this aspect of their power can be excluded as being devil fruit related is because of the visual appearance of the Gorosei's beast forms. Each elder has their beast form surrounded by rings of smoke. This is a visual element that has been present in many Zoan type devil fruits in the story, such as in Luffy's, Lucci's, and Kaku's fruits. The fact that the rings of smoke only appear around the Gorosei when they transform makes it very likely that they are in fact all Zoans. Further evidence includes both Saint Saturn and Venus Juro displaying what very much appear to be Zoan hybrid forms in addition to their beast forms. This however brings up more questions than answers. If the Gorosei all have their unique Zoan abilities, what is the explanation behind all of their shared abilities? One possibility is that these are all abilities granted to them by other Devil Fruit users. While Devil Fruits generally only grant power to their respective users, there are a few fruits in the series that can also empower other characters. For example, Bello Betty, the East Army commander of the Revolutionary Army, is able to make other people physically stronger with her Gobu Gobu no Mi. Another example would be Charlotte Nushi, whose Devil Fruit allows others to fuse with him. Then there is perhaps the most interesting example, which is the Ope Ope no Mi, which has the ability to grant another person immortality through the Eternal Youth Surgery. Despite these examples, however, they are also likely not the reason behind the Gorosei's powers. One major difference between the Gorosei and the prior examples is that the Gorosei are seemingly in full control of their powers. While someone like Bello Betty can increase the power of another person, this person cannot replicate what Bello Betty does and give power to others. This also applies to all other such examples in the story, where power that can be granted to others via Devil Fruits is only ever a temporary boost, not an entirely new ability. This is in complete contrast to the Gorosei, where someone like Saint Saturn is able to independently do things like summon the other elders from Rejoice to Egghead or talk to them through telepathy. It should also be addressed that the Gorosei have likely also not received the Ope Ope no Mi's Eternal Youth Surgery. One hint of this is that these 5 elders are very likely not the first 5 elders. When the Gorosei discuss the Nika fruit, they talk about the world government before their time being the ones who renamed the fruit to the Gomu Gomu no Mi, even referring to the matter as being legend. While the Gorosei are clearly very old, as, for example, Saint Saturn looked exactly the same 38 years ago as he does now, they are probably more similar to someone like Dr. Kureha, where they simply have longevity far beyond regular humans. A further hint that the elders are not immortal is that they are public figures known by the people living in the One Piece world. Because of this, they can't have been in power for centuries on end without raising suspicion. Ivankov actually inadvertently confirms this when he first hears about the existence of Imu from Sabo. Ivankov treats the idea of the world being ruled by an immortal being as a hypothesis. It would make no sense for Ivankov to be surprised by the idea if it was already public knowledge that Saint Saturn, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Juro, and Jupiter have been ruling the world for centuries. Furthermore, even if the elders had actually gone through the Immortal Youth Surgery, the surgery is only said to give the recipient eternal life. There is however clearly something far more going on with the Gorosei, as their form of immortality seems to involve them regenerating from all manner of attacks. To summarize all of the evidence so far, the Gorosei's beast forms are more than likely simply their Zoan forms because of the visual similarities between them and the other Zoans. Their other abilities are however very likely not Devil Fruit powers, whether this be powers granted by their own fruits or powers given to them by another Devil Fruit user. Now that we've addressed why the Gorosei's powers cannot be explained by Devil Fruits, they can also be very easily dismissed to not be Haki either. The concept of Haki revolving around armament, observation, and conquerors does not exactly leave room for powers like teleportation and regeneration. It is also very unlikely for there to be a facet of Haki outside these 3 core abilities. This is because the explanation the readers are given about Haki comes from Silver's Rayleigh, a character who's learned the true history and seemingly knows all of the secrets of the One Piece world. While the Gorosei's powers are likely not the product of Devil Fruits and Haki, we can also dismiss them as being because of technology or physical prowess as well. Even though the Gorosei likely have great physical strength, like Haki, it also does not explain their previously mentioned otherworldly abilities. While One Piece characters are able to move great distances and even fly with pure strength, no physical feat in the series has come close to something like the Gorosei instantly moving all the way from the Holy Land to Egghead. This is not even mentioning the more bizarre powers of the elders, such as telepathy. It can also be pretty much confirmed that technology is also not the reason for these powers. While someone like Saint Saturn is confirmed to be a scientist, him and the rest of the elders are seemingly very reliant on Vegapunk for much of the government's scientific advancement. If they were actually by themselves able to create things such as worldwide teleportation and communication, one starts to question why they were so reliant on a loose cannon like Vegapunk in the first place. For reference, Vegapunk even before the Egghead arc was not exactly someone devoted to the world government. Before working for them, Vegapunk was literally a rogue scientist employed by the underworld. Even after Vegapunk was recruited by the government, he also still protested many of their decisions, such as the Ohara incident or the experiments they did on Kuma. If the Gorosei were already in possession of technology even beyond what Vegapunk was able to make, it would make little sense why they were willing to put so much trust and money in someone as unreliable as him, meaning the Elder's powers are probably not based on technology either. This finally leads us to the last major source of power in the One Piece world, which are the innate abilities granted by one's race. This is arguably the most likely explanation for the Gorosei's power, as race-based abilities can grant the person multiple supernatural abilities at once, just like the Gorosei have demonstrated. This could also help explain why the Gorosei don't seem to age at the same rate as regular humans, as other races in the One Piece world, such as the Giants, have been shown to live far longer than normal humans. We can also already confirm that the Five Elders are not any sort of artificial beings, such as robots or the undead. When giving his explanation about Haki, Rayleigh says that this is an ability that only living beings are able to use. As all the Gorosei are seemingly Haki users, this also means that all of them are alive. This is further proven by the fact that despite their supernatural powers, the Gorosei apparently still have to consume food like all living beings in One Piece. The Five Elders' powers being derived from their race would actually be in line with how past characters who have seemingly broken the One Piece power system have been explained. As an example, during the Wano arc, King the Wildfire was revealed to have the ancient charm Pteranodon Devil Fruit. However, King also possessed other abilities not derived from his Devil Fruit, such as fire manipulation, invulnerability, and wings. These are all later revealed to be because King is a member of the Lunarian race. The problem with the Gorosei is that their abilities don't seem to align with any of the known races of the One Piece world. This is quite literally stated by Brocky when he fights them on Egghead Island, where he says that the Elder's abilities are beyond any races or powers he's ever seen. Keeping in mind, Brocky is 160 years old and has sailed all around the world. Based on the information given during the Whole Cake Island arc, all the known races of the One Piece world were shown in Totland, with the exception of the Giants, Lunarians, and Buccaneers. Yet, as alluded to before, the Gorosei possess abilities that don't seem to fit any of these known races. The Gorosei also view themselves as separate beings from the rest of the world. When talking to normal humans, Saturn very much considers himself not to be a member of their race, seeing humans as mere insects. While this is how the Celestial Dragons generally view the world, the Gorosei could go a step further, where unlike the other Celestial Dragons, they're literally not humans. A possible hint of this comes from Sanji, where after seeing Saint Saturn's transformation, he says that he looks less and less human. Sanji is someone who throughout the story has fought and encountered several Zoan-type Devil Fruit users, yet he's never described any of them as looking inhuman. Sanji also makes note of Saturn's eyes looking bizarre. While certain Zoans in the story have their eyes changed when they transform, what's noteworthy here is that all of the Five Elders have this same eye design, which could be another indicator of race rather than Devil Fruit power. I will also grant that it's possible that, despite the aforementioned evidence, the Gorosei are not Zoan users and these transformations are actually their natural forms. This would, for example, be backed up by chapter 1110, where the Gorosei's beast forms are named without the usual type and model of a Zoan Devil Fruit. Another indicator that something special is going on with the Gorosei is that Luffy's Red Rock was unable to hurt Valkyrie. For context, the Red Rock is an ability Luffy developed on Wano to fight Kaido, where it utilizes armament Haki in a way to do internal damage. Theoretically, it is an attack that should be able to bypass any form of external defense, yet it was still unable to damage Valkyrie, perhaps indicating that him and the other Gorosei are more than just Zoans. One final piece of evidence that points to the Gorosei being members of another race is that Imu does not actually share their mutual supernatural powers. This is actually a very important point that tells us a lot about Imu. When the Gorosei talk to each other through a significant distance, they use the aforementioned telepathic means of communication. However, as we see during Savo's Reverie flashback, when the Gorosei talk to Imu, they instead use a Denden Mushi. This very much indicates that the Gorosei's power exists separate from even Imu, and that Imu does not share their telepathy, or potentially any of their other special abilities. This is a further piece of evidence that the Elders belong to a different race from even Imu. As Ivankov says, Imu could well be one of the original 20 kings who established the world government, who's found a way to be immortal. If this is true, whatever the Gorosei are, Imu himself is very likely just a human with a Devil Fruit power. To summarize, as no other options seem to make sense, by process of elimination, the most likely explanation behind the Gorosei's special abilities is that they belong to an unknown race of being in the One Piece story. The first part of the video established that Hell can very much be a place that exists in the One Piece story. The second part established that the Gorosei are most likely members of a currently unknown race, as evidenced by their wholly unique set of abilities that cannot be explained by any other aspect of the One Piece world. This third part of the video is going to combine these two ideas, and and discuss the possibility that the Gorosei come literally from hell, and were brought from there by Imu using a hell devil foot. First of all, it was previously established that the One Piece universe holds many subdimensions such as the door dimension and the mirror dimension. What should also be brought up is that there can be living beings native to these dimensions. This is because in the mirror world, the mirrors are actual sentient beings that can tell people what they see happen in the normal world. This means that there could be other living beings existing in other dimensions of the One Piece universe. Secondly, let us establish why hell specifically would make sense as the place where the Gorosei come from. The biggest hint of this comes from Ethan Baron Venus Churro. When Ethan attacks the pacifista on Egghead Island, his sword actually leaves the pacifista frozen. This is extremely similar to an ability used by Brook, which Brook refers to as the chills of the underworld. To make it clear, ice is actually an extremely rare ability in One Piece. For the longest time, excluding Brook, the only character who was able to manipulate ice was Aokiji, who has eaten the literal ice devil foot. Ice manipulation is so rare in fact, that when Blackbeard sees his crew frozen in chapter 1081, he thinks that Aokiji is the only person in the world who could do such a thing. If Ethan does in fact have the Bagotsu Zoan fruit, then nothing about said creature suggests that it should grant Ethan ice powers. It could very well be that both Brook and Ethan are using the same ability here. If hell is an actual place in One Piece where souls go after death, it could be that someone like Brook is able to access some of Hell's powers. The Gorosei being possible natives of Hell could help explain all manner of their abilities. To begin with, summoning circles created by the Gorosei actually have a very satanic aesthetic to them. Within the circle, there is a symbol of a 5-pointed star, also known as a pentagram. In the real world, a pentagram is often associated with Hell and Satan. For example, the official emblem of the real-life Church of Satan is a pentagram within a black circle, which is eerily similar to the Gorosei summoning circles. This connection to Satanism goes even further, as another way to translate the word Gorosei from Japanese to English is the 5 elder stars. Satan is actually an established figure in the One Piece world, as when Brook is captured by cultists before the time skip, they refer to him as Lord Satan. Just like Hell itself, it could be that this is another facet of the One Piece world that the people believe to be myth but is actually real. Further hellish motives around the Gorosei include Saturn's hat protruding literal horns when he transforms, and most of the Gorosei's Zoan devil fruits being based on what could be described as demonic creatures. As mentioned before, the idea this video is presenting is that Imu brought the Gorosei to the regular world from Hell with the Hell fruit. The Hell fruit could work the same way as the Door fruit or the Mirror fruit, where it would essentially make the user the key to said world. One might bring up that we saw Imu transform into a gigantic creature during the Sabo's flashback, which would be more akin to a Zoan fruit, rather than a paramecia like the Door fruit. This is a fair point, but does not make it impossible for Imu to have a fruit that grants him access to Hell. Other mythical Zoan fruits that change the user's appearance also allow the user access to other abilities. Katarina Devon has the 9-tailed fox fruit, which allows her to both change into said fox, as well as giving her the ability to transform into other people. Luffy's fruit when awakened also transforms into the Sun God, while also granting him abilities such as turning the environment into rubber. On paper, Imu could have something like a mythical Zoan Satan fruit. As addressed before, Satan is an actual figure the One Piece world believes in, which could also mean that there's a Satan devil fruit. With this fruit, Imu could have the power to both transform into Satan and to summon beings from Hell. This is however just one idea. It is still also possible for Imu to have a paramecia Hell fruit. Even though Imu transformed into a gigantic beast, this wouldn't be the first time a paramecia fruit allowed its user to significantly alter their real appearance. If Imu is someone who's multiple times visited Hell, and if the Gorosei actually originate from there, this could actually explain a lot about the world government. For example, the government's underwater prison, Impel Down, not only incarcerates its prisoners, but also commits to torturing them, just like people who are sent to Hell would be. Many of the prison staff also wear demonic attire such as horns and pitchforks. Impel Down has also literally been referred to as being Hell, and the former warden Magellan has also been called the boss of Hell. The prison itself is structured around 6 levels that are named after different hells. With regards to the topic of this video, perhaps the most interesting of these is level 5, the freezing hell. This level is completely frozen, and the prisoners held there are exposed to things like hypothermia and frostbite. The level could be a reference to the aforementioned chills of the underworld used by Brook and possibly Venus Churro, perhaps further indicating that the real hell in One Piece is also a very cold place. If Impel Down is in fact based on actual hell, it could also serve as foreshadowing of what Imu could perhaps do with a hell fruit. In a sense, the fruit could allow Imu to manipulate several already seen Logia abilities such as ice, forest, drought and fire. The last one could also explain why Imu was seemingly unaffected by Sabo's fire fist. Another thing worth considering is also that the Gorosei are not the only beings Imu has brought from hell. During the reverie, we see that Imu has an attendant who informs him of the Gorosei's arrival to the throne room. Considering that Imu is willing to destroy entire countries to make sure that his existence remains hidden, it can be safely assumed that all the characters he allows into his confidence are in the top echelons of the world government. One other character that could be in Imu's inner circle is an older man who oversees the empty throne. The man also bears a striking resemblance to Saint Mars. However, what's noteworthy about these attendants as well as the Gorosei themselves is that they all look physically human. This seems to argue against the point of them being members of another race, let alone them originating from hell itself. This could however all simply be a facade. It is actually possible that the Gorosei did not always look like humans, and were simply made to look like that by Imu. As Imu wants the Gorosei to serve as the public rulers of the world in his stead, he would need them to look like regular humans so as to not give away their secret. This is actually something the world government could have achieved through a known devil fruit in the story. The Mane no Mi is a fruit that's been seen being used by both Bon Clay and Kurosumi Higurashi in the manga. The fruit gives the user the ability to change into whoever they've touched. In theory, an awakened user of this fruit could potentially change the appearance of other people. This is because paramecia awakenings often allow devil fruit powers to affect both the environment and other people. We saw this for example during the Wano arc, with instances such as Kid turning Big Mom into a magnet or Luffy turning Kaido into rubber. It could be that the government once had an awakened devil fruit user with the Mane no Mi whose job was to change the Gorosei to look like humans. This could be another explanation for why the Gorosei don't seem to age, as the Mane no Mi could have given them permanent human forms that do not change on the outside. To take this theory a bit further, what if Imu actually stole the Gorosei's human appearances from the Celestial Dragons? While the Gorosei are presented as members of the Celestial Dragons with human appearances and faces, all of this could just be another one of Imu's lies. The reason why this is so interesting is because it could very well fit Imu's character to not actually trust the Celestial Dragons. The world government was founded by the 20 kings whose descendants are now the Celestial Dragons. Imu clearly had a problem with this kind of sharing of power, as he wanted to be the sole king of the world. In a sense, it could be that Imu doesn't see the other kings and their descendants as allies but as rivals to his power. Most of the current day Celestial Dragons are also clearly not even aware that Imu exists, believing that their fellow Celestial Dragons, the Gorosei, are the ones who rule the world. Imu could however simply be playing the Celestial Dragons. To give the Celestial Dragons the illusion of power, Imu could have selected a few of their members as the public rulers of the world, the 5 elders. In actuality, however, Imu could have simply stolen the names and faces of these Celestial Dragons and given them to his personal demons. While pure speculation, it could be that the Gorosei we've seen so far are all imposters, and that the real saints Jupiter, Venus Juro, Mars, Mercury and Saturn are either dead or imprisoned somewhere. As the Gorosei say that the world government has existed before them, it could be that this is a process Imu has done many times in the past, by having his minions from hell assume the identities of reputable Celestial Dragons. While this is just an idea, it would certainly be consistent with both Imu's past of stealing power from the Celestial Dragons as well as his borderline insane distrust of anyone outside his inner circle. To summarize the points brought up in this video so far, it was first established that hell can very much be a place that can actually exist in the One Piece story, potentially in a pocket dimension like the door dimension or the mirror dimension. After this, the video went over how the Gorosei being creatures from hell could actually fit in the story and explain all of their abnormal powers. Finally, it was established how Imu could have achieved all of this by bringing the Gorosei over from hell with his devil fruit, and making them steal the identities of Celestial Dragons to serve as the public rulers of the world government. Personally, I think this could be a very interesting idea if used in the actual story. The idea from this video mainly came from Vegapunk's explanation of where devil fruits come from. Personally, I think Vegapunk's explanation offered a bunch of interesting ideas on the different devil fruits that could later appear in the story, like the Hell fruit. When I hear people say the Gorosei are from the Void Century, I remove the safety from my pistol. All jokes aside, this is a quick little video on why the Gorosei, despite clearly being very old, are not from the Void Century. I've seen One Piece fans talk about this a lot in YouTube comments, and I figured I'd just address why the elders are not actually that old in this video. If you think what I'm saying is wrong, you're free to tell me in the comments. Anyway, the 5 elders are clearly very old, as we saw Saint Saturn already looking like an old man in Kuma's flashback, which was 38 years in the past. This does not, however, confirm that they're survivors from the Void Century. In fact, several things in the story indicate the opposite. The biggest hint comes from the Gorosei themselves. During the Wano arc, they quite literally say that they're not as old as the world government itself, which is an institution that was created at the end of the Void Century. When the 5 elders are talking about the Nika fruit, they question why the world government renamed the fruit as the Gomu Gomu no Mi in the past. and that the fruit is a legend, even to them. The elders are also clearly not as informed on the events of the Void Century as one might think. When the elders sacrifice Kurnika to kill Luffy before he awakens his fruit, some of them question what the point of this action was. The other elders then have to explain both the reason and the history of the Nika fruit. This would be extremely bizarre if the Gorosei had actually lived during the Void Century, as this is information they should already know like the back of their hand. This notion that the Gorosei didn't live through the Void Century is further reinforced in the Egghead arc, when they encountered the island's giant robot. The robot apparently appeared out of nowhere and caused a rampage in the Holy Land 200 years ago. When we hear the robot's thoughts during the Egghead arc, however, it is revealed that it is actually a far more ancient being. The robot is apparently called Emmet, and he's someone who personally knew Joy Boy, which all but confirms that Emmet himself is also from the Void Century. When the Gorosei fight Emmet, however, they do not recognize him as a figure from the Void Century, but simply as the robot that rampaged in the Holy Land 200 years ago. With all of this evidence, it seems pretty clear that the Gorosei as a group are not as ancient as the Void Century. Still, could this however only apply to some, but not all of their members? For example, while Saint Jupiter didn't know why the government had renamed the Nika fruit, and Martian Worker seemingly saw Emmet as just a robot from 200 years ago, Venus, Jura and Saturn might still be older than the others, and potential survivors of the Void Century. I don't mean to rain on anyone's parade, but this is also very unlikely. The reason for this is that the Gorosei are the public rulers of the world government. They are known the world over, and they regularly deal face to face with other figures, such as the Marines or the kings of the world. If they had actually been ruling the world for centuries, people would have been guaranteed to take notice. A concrete example of this comes from the character of Ivankov. After Sapo tells him of what he saw during the reverie, Ivankov is shocked that there could be an immortal being ruling the world government, who's been alive since the Void Century. If this is a surprising revelation to Ivankov, it essentially confirms that the Gorosei cannot be that old, as Ivankov doesn't question their age, and considers their existence to be completely natural. If the Gorosei were actually immortal beings who ruled the world since the Void Century, one would start to question why Imu is willing to go to such drastic lengths to hide his existence from the world. The difference of the world being ruled by one immortal instead of 5 immortals would not exactly be significant, at least in my mind. While the true nature of the Gorosei is still a mystery, based on all of this evidence, it can at the least be proven that they're not from the Void Century. Even though the fact that they seemingly don't age is odd, this is also still something that isn't wholly new in the story. While most humans in One Piece seemingly start being infirm around their 70s, with not much life left to live, there are outliers. Dr. Kureha, for example, is a character who's currently alive and well at 141 years old. This is also something that's seemingly still natural and feasible in the One Piece world. This is because while the people of Drum Island joke about Kureha's age, they still view her as just a human. It's also still possible that the Gorosei are actually immortal and have stopped aging. However, this is something that would have had to happen to them at some point in the time after the Void Century. The Gorosei not being from the Void Century also doesn't take away from any of the other ideas regarding them. They're clearly still very special, and the ideas around their nature can range anywhere from them being recipients of the Ope Ope no Mi's immortality surgery to them being aliens from outer space. Most of the Gorosei have now been sent back to the Holy Land from Egghead Island by Joy Boy's Conqueror's Haki Blast. They will likely keep playing an important role in the final saga, but most of the elders are probably done for the rest of this arc. Now that their mission to Egghead is over, I think it's a good time to ask this question. Who actually is the strongest of the 5 elders? This video will try to answer this by analyzing everything we know about the Gorosei, from the Egghead arc and the entire story. The video will one by one go through each of the elders to make a case why each of them could be the strongest. And I think a good place to start is with Saint Ethan Baron Venus Churro. This is because Ethan is actually the elder most fans think is the strongest. I've done multiple polls on this channel about this topic, and Ethan has always won by a considerable margin. This is honestly pretty understandable. To put it very simply, Ethan is pretty much the coolest member of the Gorosei. While how cool someone is an entirely subjective question, it is hard to argue that Ethan did not get the lion's share of the best looking moments of the elders during the Egghead arc. What's also noteworthy here is that Ethan was somewhat separated from the group, where he is the only Gorosei who did not fight Luffy in the arc. This arguably only protected Ethan's own sense of aura, as all the other elders were to a certain degree embarrassed when fighting against Gear 5th Luffy. You could bring up that how cool someone is not the same thing as being strong. While this is true, in One Piece, things work a bit differently, where the rule of cool very much applies. When it comes to the many villain groups in the series, the strongest member is very often also the coolest. For example, both Mr. One and King the Wildfire were the strongest officers in their respective organizations. While Oda allowed Crocodile and Kaido's other officers to fail and fool around, Mr. One and King were the consummate professionals, who got the job done and dealt with anyone who got in their way. While Ethan doing something like cutting the Labo face in half still does not tell us exactly how strong he is, it gives Ethan a lot more gravitas than any of his peers, which is a possible indicator that he is also the strongest among them. Ethan having style is however not the only argument for this. Another perhaps more compelling point is that the planetary ranking of the Gorosei may also indicate that Ethan is Imu's right-hand man. The Gorosei are all named after the 5 innermost planets of the real-world solar system excluding Earth. The reason why Earth is excluded is that Earth may not represent any of the elders, but Imu himself. This would certainly make a lot of sense, as Imu is for all intents and purposes the ruler of One Piece's Earth-like planet. If this is true, it could be that the real-life order of the planets would also represent the strength ranking of the Gorosei, where the elder whose planet is closest to Earth would also be the most powerful. As it happens, this would be Saint Ethan Baron Venus Shuro, represented by the planet Venus. One might question if this ranking of planets is once again relevant for determining the strength of a character. It is actually extremely important, because the Gorosei wouldn't be the first enemy group whose power has been represented by this kind of ranking. The video previously brought up that both Mr. One and King were the strongest officers of both of their organizations. This is quite literally represented by their names. In Baroque works, each officer agent was given a number to represent their rank. As the strongest of all the agents, Dustbone was called Mr. One. Likewise, in the Beast Pirates, Kaido has named many of his followers according to playing cards, with his top 3 men being called Jack, Queen, and the strongest of them, King. However, what if all these points about Ethan are misplaced? What if there was another member of the Gorosei who more accurately represented all the points brought up about Ethan, and who was actually Imu's true right hand? The poll I showed you before, where most fans seemingly saw Ethan as the strongest, was actually from last year. This year, however, he's got an arrival, where in a poll I made a few days ago, Saint Valkyrie has considerably shortened the gap between himself and Ethan. Based on the comments that I've read, many believe that Valkyrie had by far the best feats of any of the elders on Egghead. This claim actually does have a lot of validity. Valkyrie is the elder who had the most engagements with Luffy, during which he showed some of the best defense of any character in the series. Unlike with some of the other elders, none of Luffy's attacks actually forced Valkyrie to regenerate. Valkyrie did not only completely withstand Luffy's attacks, but he actually made Luffy hurt himself when attacking. This is extremely impressive and noteworthy, because there have only been a few times something like this has happened to Luffy in the story. Something similar to this happened in Luffy's fight against Katakuri, where Luffy hurt his fists when clashing with Katakuri's armament haki. This was also in the beginning of Luffy's fight with Katakuri, when the latter's haki was far beyond Luffy's, perhaps indicating that a similar gap exists between Luffy and Valkyrie. What Valkyrie however did was arguably even more impressive than what happened with Katakuri. The attack Luffy hit Valkyrie with was the Red Rock, which is an ability Luffy developed in Wano to fight Kaido. The Red Rock does internal damage, and actually succeeded in bypassing Kaido's durability and hurting him. This feat from Valkyrie deserves a lot of emphasis. The fact that the Red Rock only hurt Luffy potentially means that Valkyrie is not only able to counter attacks that do internal damage, but that he might have even better defense than Kaido. Luffy's Red Rock on Egghead should also be much stronger than the one he landed on Kaido, because of how much he's grown in the last 100 chapters. Valkyrie's defensive prowess is built up even further, when Luffy later attacks him in Gear 5th, yet the attack still only ends up damaging Luffy. Valkyrie is however clearly not just a tank, but also showed very good offense when fighting on Egghead. When first targeting Luffy, Valkyrie does a Conqueror's Haki roar that ends up shaking the entire island. This alone is already very significant, because the only other time we've seen Conqueror's Haki affect the environment to this level was in the clash between Roger and Whitebeard. The roar also affects Luffy himself, causing his clothes, eyes, and even his scars to fly off. While Luffy in Gear 5th can often overreact when he is not in serious danger, this is still noteworthy. For example, when Kaido hit Luffy with the Conqueror of Three Worlds Ragnaraku, It made Luffy's eyes pop out and forced him out of Gear 5th. This is notably different from Kaido hitting Luffy with basic attacks, where Luffy reacts in a less goofy manner and remains in Gear 5th. This is perhaps an indication that the more over-the-top Luffy's reaction to attacks are, the more damage he receives. Workery, however, has arguably an even better offensive showing later in the Egghead arc. He actually ends up being the Elder who cuts off Vegapunk's transmission by goring Emmet the robot and sending him to the bottom of the sea. Emmet himself is also clearly pretty strong, as, unlike Luffy, he was actually able to later damage Workery, as well as block an attack from Jupiter. These feats clearly paint a picture of Workery being an absolute unit, and potentially the strongest of the 5 Elders. However, they may not tell the full story. This is a thing that frequently happens in One Piece, where even though a character participates in a lot of combat scenes, their best feats are only seen later on. Zoro was arguably someone who never went all out in the post-time skip until the Onigashima raid. If Zoro had at the time been judged purely on his feats such as beating Hyosu and Pika, he genuinely wouldn't have been that impressive, even though in reality, he was already at a level where he could fight an emperor and his crew. In the case of the Gorosei, as we've still only seen so little of them, it still cannot be determined who of them is the strongest, based purely on feats. However, feats are not the only thing that Workery has going for him. A point that was brought up before is that the Elder strength ranking may be symbolized by the order of the planets in the solar system. While Ethan's planet of Venus is the one closest to Earth, this is only half true. Because the planets are in constant rotation, Venus is not always the planet that is the closest to Earth. In fact, for most of the year, it is actually Mercury, the planet Workery is named after. This would mean that if Imu is meant to represent Earth, it is actually Workery, not Ethan, who represents the planet closest to him. There's also the alternate theory, where Imu actually does not represent Earth, but the Sun, the center of the solar system. This would also once again make Workery the Elder with the planet closest to Imu. However, I would personally find this idea to be rather odd, as Imu and the world government's backstory revolves around them opposing Joy Boy, who had the sun god Devil Fruit. While I personally think Imu representing Earth would make more sense, I still thought that this was something worth bringing up. There are actually a lot of other motives around Workery's character that would traditionally indicate that he is Imu's top man. For one, there's literally his name, Top Man Workery. As brought up before, names in One Piece can be very indicative of strength, and you really couldn't get more obvious than one of the 5 Elders' surname being Top Man. The first name, Workery, is also arguably a lot more indicative of strength than any of the other names. Another thing that could indicate Workery's position as the head of the 5 Elders is once again quite literal, where he is almost always the one positioned at the center of the group. Almost every time we see the Elders together in the story, they are actually sitting or standing in the exact same order, with Workery almost always occupying the place in the center. Considering that there are an uneven number of Elders, it could make sense that the Elder that is in the middle is the head of the group. A final thing I'd like to address about Workery is once again another point brought up earlier regarding Ethan, which is the cool factor. While once again very subjective, Workery definitely has an argument for being singled out of the group in the same way Ethan was. He was not only given the most combat scenes against Luffy, but Workery was also the Gorosei that was pitted against Emmet, and he even succeeded in cutting off Vegapunk's broadcast, which was the entire reason why the Elders had to come to Egghead. While this once again doesn't prove that he is the strongest, it could still be an indicator, in light of how the One Piece story usually handles the character who is the strongest of the group, where they get a lot of important moments in the plot. This is why it might seem paradoxical that the next 5 Elder that the video is going to analyze is arguably the least cool of the bunch. Saint Jupiter is the Elder who's performed the worst in all the polls that I've done about the Gorosei, only ever getting a few percentage points. This is understandable, as Jupiter has definitely been getting the short end of the stick during the Egghead arc. In the very first chapter when Saturn summoned the rest of the Elders to Egghead, Jupiter already came off as the black sheep of the group, when Dorian Brookie managed to literally cut off his head at the end of the chapter. Jupiter's image arguably hasn't recovered since this moment. He's had both the least impressive feats as well as the least cool panels of any of the Elders. He is also the only Elder who hasn't elicited a reaction of fear or intimidation from the different characters on Egghead. Jupiter could also be argued to have the most docile title of all of the Elders, where he is the warrior god of agriculture. While I'm certain that he is very good at farming, it is not exactly a position that indicates martial might. Would this then mean that we can skip over Jupiter and move on to analyzing Mars and Saturn? Not necessarily. As mentioned before, A character's feats only tell us so much before they reveal their full power. There is also a good phrase that could describe Jupiter standing among the Gorosei. The quiet ones are the ones you need to watch out for. While One Piece is full of powerful characters who make a strong first impression, there are also those that do the opposite. In Chapter 1, when we first meet Shanks, he actually didn't make that bombastic of an introduction. Instead, Shanks gets berated by Hikuma, where he gets drinks poured on his head, and is made to clean the mess made by the bandits at Makino's bar. Naturally, the readers who thought that Shanks was weak because of this couldn't have been more wrong, as he himself proved later in the chapter. This is something that happens with a lot of characters in One Piece, where their first unnoteworthy scenes make it all the more interesting when it is later revealed how strong they actually are. This also applies to many enemy groups in the series. Back during Water 7, Lucci was arguably the least noteworthy member of the Galila shipwrights, and he didn't even have any lines of dialogue. Even when it came to him and the other undercover CP9 agents scenes where they were wearing masks, it was Plueno, not Lucci, who was given most of the focus. This only made it more interesting when it was finally revealed that Lucci had been the strongest character in the arc all this time. This could also be what the story is doing with Jupiter. As said at the start, Egghead was probably just the beginning, and the Gorosei will likely keep playing a big role in the final saga of One Piece. While Jupiter wasn't particularly impressive in this arc, it could just be that he's being saved for future arcs. This is however not the only argument for Jupiter being potentially the strongest of the elders. If you recall, it was brought up earlier that the Gorosei almost always appear in the same order, and that Workery being almost always in the center could indicate that he is the strongest. However, there is also an argument that the order the elders appear in is actually a numerical order from left to right, which goes Jupiter, Venus Juro, Workery, Mars, and Saturn, indicating that Jupiter, not Workery, is at the top. The evidence for this being an actual dynamic in the story comes from the Gorosei's summoning circles, which are all numbered according to the order brought up earlier. While the order of planets is an interesting idea, this is arguably a lot more convincing, as this is literally the same system One Piece used to indicate the strength of the Baroque Works officer agents in the past. However, there is also an argument for the planets also indicating that Jupiter is Imu's true right hand and the strongest of the group. Of all the planets in the solar system, Jupiter is by far the largest. This also ties to the name Jupiter itself, which comes from the Roman pantheon of gods, where Jupiter was seen as the king of the gods. Religious inspiration is something that can actually be very indicative of strength in One Piece, as I've brought up in many of my other videos. Just like Jupiter is the chief deity among the planets named after Roman gods, so too could Jupiter be the head of the 5 elders. One last thing that could hint at Jupiter being the strongest is the fact that he appears to be the youngest of the group. While there is clearly something going on with the Gorosei's longevity, as Saturn hasn't visibly aged at all in the last 38 years, this does not mean that they do not age or that it doesn't affect their strength. This is something that happens frequently in One Piece, where characters who've reached an old enough age complain about how much weaker it has made them. This also applies to ancient beings, such as the giants that live for hundreds of years, where even among them, the old are not as strong as the young. Because of this, it could be that Jupiter is the only Gorosei who is currently still in his physical prime. However, let's for the sake of an argument assume that the Gorosei's elderly appearance isn't any indication on their strength. For example, for all we know, the elders are actually not human and their outward appearances are just a facade. In this case, it could actually be very interesting if Jupiter was in fact the oldest and strongest of the group, despite looking like the youngest and the weakest. This was actually something that I think was handled quite well in the Fullmetal Alchemist series, with the homunculi. Even though the homunculi look human, they are all actually artificial beings whose appearances are meant to deceive others. In the story, Pride, who is both the oldest and strongest of the homunculi, actually appears in the form of a young child, despite in truth being a demon that's lived for centuries. Considering how the world government in One Piece is an organization built on lies and deceit, I think it would actually be quite fitting for even something like the Gorosei to be led by someone like Jupiter, who is simply presenting a facade of being young and inexperienced. I'd also like to bring up an idea brought up in one of the comments of my video about the Gorosei actually not being from the Void Century. A user by the name of Jaeger Bolse brought up the idea that the Celestial Dragons have for centuries been farming the Ope Ope Nomi's eternal youth surgery, and giving immortality to the elders. The younger each of the elders looks, the earlier they receive the surgery, and the more important they are. This would correspond with the earlier numerical order of the Gorosei, as Jupiter, representing 1, is the youngest looking, and Saturn, representing 5, is the oldest looking. I like this idea for several reasons. It would actually give a lot of logic to the Elders 1 to 5 ranking if it was based on appearance, as it clearly has little to do with the planets. The idea of the government wanting constant access to the Ope Ope no Mi would also be consistent, as the Marines were willing to pay 5 billion berry for the fruit in Law's flashback. It would also fit the earlier concept of the Elders' appearances not being representative of their actual ages, with Jupiter being potentially someone who was born centuries before the others, and was given immortality early in his life because he saw that much potential to Imu. Still, this is just one idea, and we still have 2 Elders left to go for this video. The next Elder we're going to analyze is Saint Marcus Mars. When compiling the notes for this video, Mars actually had a lot of things going for him. Like Ethan and Valkyrie, Mars has gotten very impactful panels on Egghead, and his haki alone has been enough to intimidate the likes of Jinbei and Lucci. The vocal point of my argument was going to be that Mars was seemingly the one most protected among the Elders on Egghead. While every other Elder received damage from fighting the Straw Hats and the other characters, Mars was kept out of the fray, perhaps indicating that damaging him was a bigger deal than the rest. Even Ethan, who didn't fight Luffy, received damage from characters like Sanji and Atlas. This is something that has happened with a lot of villains in the past arcs of the story, where the big boss character is built up by no one damaging them, and it being an important scene when it finally happens. This point was however made worthless by none other than Monkey D. Luffy. 10 chapters after he'd arrived on Egghead Island, Mars finally got to fight Luffy in Gear 5th, and the latter did not go easy on him. The attack Luffy did on Mars was arguably the most damage any of the Elders have received on Egghead, other than Joy Boy's Conqueror's Haki Blast. Just like with Joy Boy's Haki, Luffy's attack quite literally blew Mars out of the arc, which was a major point against both his feats and cool factor. Despite what Luffy did to him, I do however still have some arguments for why Mars could still be the strongest Elder. As brought up before, the Gorosei's names do not only stem from planets but from the gods of the Roman pantheon. Mars is very noteworthy among these gods, as he was literally the Roman god of war. This may not be as grandiose as Jupiter being named after the king of the gods, but it could still be more relevant if we're analyzing the Gorosei purely from a combat angle. In One Piece, just like in real life, being the leader of a group does not always mean that you are also the strongest, as demonstrated by many characters in the story. I suppose there's also an argument that Mars being the only Gorosei able to fly could indicate that he is Imu's strongest subordinate, as it would parallel a lot of other groups like the Whitebeard Pirates or the Beast Pirates. However, this is admittedly not that strong of a pattern in the story. As just one example, Zoro is not capable of flying. It probably sounds like I'm downplaying Mars with these arguments. I do not genuinely have anything against him being the strongest, but I'm just nonplussed as to what could be the indication of this, other than perhaps him being the One Piece god of war. If you actually have figured out something about him that I've just missed, please educate me in the comments. But for now, I think it's best we move on to the final member of the Gorosei. From reading a lot of polls and comments on YouTube, it appears that many don't consider there to be much of a chance of Saturn being the strongest. The arguments I've heard often mention that he's the last member of the Elders, in things such as the ranking of the planets from the Earth or the Sun, or the numerical order the Gorosei often appear in. There is also the fact that Saturn was the first Elder to get focus outside the group, perhaps indicating that he'll also be the weakest and the first to be defeated. While all of this may be true, there are what I actually think are strong arguments for Saturn potentially being the top Gorosei. The first thing to be brought up is that Saint Saturn being the first Elder to get focus may actually be a positive rather than a negative. Even though many groups in the series are introduced by weaker members being focused on first before the stronger members, this is not always the case. The best exception to this is perhaps Mihawk, who served as the story's introduction to the Warlords, while also being the strongest member of the group. What's also noteworthy about the Gorosei is that they weren't focused on one by one like many of the other groups in the series. With the Gorosei, Saturn was given the limelight by him first arriving on Egghead, and then the rest of the group were simply revealed all at the same time later in the arc. This could be argued to make Saturn stand out as perhaps being more important than the rest. However, there is honestly an even better argument for Saturn being possibly the strongest Elder, which is in-story facts. While things like the planetary order or the names of the Elders may be relevant, concrete things that have happened in the story are far more compelling evidence when analyzing someone's strength. While all the Gorosei hold the title of warrior god, there is actually a lot of evidence for Saturn being the most militaristic of the group. This is because his title of warrior god of science and defense is actually the only one related to combat. This is also arguably seen in practice, where of all of the Gorosei, Saturn was the one who went to Egghead with Kizaru and the Marines. This is noteworthy because this was purely a military mission. The government's plan was to first send CP0 agents to assassinate Vegapunk. However, if they were to fail, the government had also prepared the military fleet led by Saturn as backup to eliminate Vegapunk via a direct attack. The other Gorosei were not exactly engaged in different battles at this time, but they actually remained in the Holy Land. If they were to send an Elder to Egghead, it would have made a lot of sense for them to send in the strongest one, considering the nature of the mission. Earlier in the video, we discussed how Valkyrie had arguably the best defensive showings on Egghead Island. While this may be true, Saturn could genuinely be argued to have shown the best offense of any of the Elders. When Saturn, Valkyrie and Jupiter face off against Gear 5th Luffy, Saturn spits several poison blobs at Luffy, which he ends up striking back at the Gorosei with a makeshift baseball bat. The blobs actually end up exploding and damaging the Elders, but what's noteworthy here is that the explosion was actually powerful enough to force Valkyrie to regenerate. As brought up before, this is something Luffy never managed to do, not even while in Gear 5th, indicating that Saturn's poison is immensely destructive. If I were to make another argument for Saturn not relating to his title or feats, it would be relating to the numerical order of the Gorosei. If the order the Gorosei often appear in as a group is also to be taken as a strength ranking, it could actually be an indication that Saturn, not Jupiter, is the strongest. Meaning, instead of number 1 being the strongest, it would be number 5, the highest number. The reason why this could actually be the case is a page shown in chapter 1086. This page finally reveals the names and titles of all of the Gorosei, and presents them in their usual left to right order. What's also noteworthy here is that the page also shows Imu, who's located on the right side of the page. If we are to use the same logic as with Imu representing Earth, it could be that the closer each Elder is to Imu on this page, the more important and stronger they are. That pretty much concludes all the points I had for every member of the Gorosei being potentially the strongest. Naturally, none of this is concrete and it's way too early in the story to determine who actually is the strongest of the group. If making this video taught me anything at least, it's that it could genuinely still be any of them. This could also just all be an intentional part of the story to make readers speculate before finally giving the answer. If you want my personal opinion, of all the ideas brought up in this video, I surprisingly like the idea of Jupiter being the strongest the most. It would take me back to a lot of fast characters in the story, who initially came off as jobbers, only to actually be demons in disguise. However, this is completely reliant on Jupiter actually being a twist character, and him being way more intimidating once he finally gets more focus. Still, that's just my take, and I don't really see anything wrong with someone like Valkyrie or Ethan being the strongest. Feel free to share your own thoughts in the comments on this topic. The video still has a few minutes to go until reaching the 1 hour mark, so I'll end it with a quick little bonus theory about something that's been on my mind. It's regarding the Gorosei scars. The two Gorosei who have scars are Saint Saturn and Saint Jupiter. Because of how large their scars are, it is not unlikely that Saturn and Jupiter received them in battle. This brings up two questions. How was someone able to scar the Elders, and who was the one who scarred them? We've seen that even Luffy in Gear 5 is unable to hurt the Elders without them regenerating, which could hint that the character who scarred Saturn and Jupiter was even stronger than Luffy. This character could also be someone very ancient, as when we saw Saint Saturn 38 years ago at God Valley, he already had his scars. As already brought up in this video though, the Gorosei are not from the Void Century, so the one who scarred them also couldn't have been Joy Boy or any of his allies. My personal theory is that the one who scarred Saturn and Jupiter was actually Imu himself. This does not necessarily mean that Imu and the Gorosei were once enemies. The idea that I'm referring to is that the 5 Elders regularly engage Imu in sparring to hone each other's strength. This would help explain why the Gorosei are so strong despite almost never leaving the Holy Land to fight other strong people. As Saturn himself says when he enters Egghead, it's been a long time since he's been to the surface. Imu being powerful enough to scar him and Jupiter could also make a lot of sense, as Imu was possibly a rival to Joy Boy, who himself is one of the strongest One Piece characters in history. Anyway, that's it for the bonus theory. If you're a madman who still wants to hear even more of me talking about the Gorosei, I have another video on my channel about which Straw Hat might end up fighting Saint Ethan Baron Venus Churro, which you can watch by clicking here. And really, if you actually managed to watch the whole hour, thank you so much.